Afternoon, everyone. So thank you for joining today's webinar. Just before we begin, a couple of technical issues. If you come across any problems during the presentation, you can chat to the host through the chat button. And please, at the end of today's webinar, complete our survey to give us some ideas for topics you'd like to cover. And in particular, Dr. Ginsburg is going to be talking today about resilience and strength-based approaches to working with young people. So if you have any thoughts or would like follow-up or additional topics to address in that space, please let us know. During the webinar, you can chat in your comments or questions to Dr. Ginsburg, and we'll compile those and hold those till the end of our presentation. So thanks again, and let's get started. On behalf of the Community Technical Assistance Center of New York, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Building on the Strengths of Young People Who Have Endured Hardship. My name is Jim Rodriguez, and I'm the Director of Trauma-Informed Services at the CTAC and the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research. So, you know, Maya Angelou once said, I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. And this statement of the power of the human spirit applies to all of us, but in particular to young people who've been impacted by trauma and severe adversity. It speaks to our individual and collective resilience. And just to be clear, resilience, as from our point of view, is not an individual trait, but it's a process that young people go through. It is not something that young people, or anyone for that matter, either has or doesn't have. And we all have it. And it's a process of, again, constantly adapting, building, and in some cases, rebuilding the self in the face of severe adversity. And most importantly, as Dr. Ginsburg is going to talk about, it's most often fostered and promoted through relationships with others. So our presenter today is Dr. Ken Ginsberg. Dr. Ginsberg is a pediatrician specializing in adolescent medicine at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And he's also a professor of pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. He practices social adolescent medicine. That is medicine that pays attention to prevention and the recognition that social contexts and stressors affect all aspects of health. And he's also in the past consulted with programs like the Boys and Girls Club and Covenant House. He's the author of Building Resilience in Children and Teens, Giving Kids Roots and Wings, Reaching Teens of Strength-Based Communication Strategies to Build Resilience and Support Healthy Adolescent Development, and Raising Kids to Thrive, Balancing Love with Expectations and Protection with Trust. And I have to say, a few years ago, I had a chance to see Ken speak, and it was one of those talks where I found myself either out loud or in my head saying yes, because it was such a clear and full-throated championing for both seeing and promoting resilience in young people. And so with all that said, I want to turn it over to Dr. Ken Ginsberg. Ken?
Thank you so much, Jim, for that very generous introduction. And I emphatically agree with the points that you made about resilience. So today, we're going to be talking about building on the strengths of young people who've endured hardships. But let's be clear, there is literally nothing I'm going to say about working to support those young people who have had the hardest lives that will not also benefit all young people. That's really critical to know. So when we give kids who are deserving of our focused attention, trauma sensitive, resilience building opportunities to develop, all kids benefit. And I think that that's an incredibly important thing for us to get on the same page about. So let's begin. Let's begin with this boy. This young man was the screensaver on my computer for about 7 years. And look at his face. Look at his smile. So one of my daughters, I have identical girls, but only one of them has the crinkles between her nose. And that's how I could tell them apart. So when I see this kid, I am reminded of joy, of possibility. I'm reminded of why we do what we do. And I want to begin this presentation on that kind of a spiritual note, to remember why we are coming together. It's to build a world in which every young person will thrive. Every young person will experience the joy that this child seems to be experiencing in the moment. This boy is on an Italian Navy boat because his refugee boat just sank. And I don't know what happened in his 2 or so years of life that made it so that his family got on the boat, but I know that it had something to do with building a better life for him. But I know definitively what the last hour looked like. There was terror. There was screaming. People thought they were going to die because the boat was sinking. They got cold and wet. And yet this boy looks okay. So what is this picture really of? Is it of a cute child? Yeah. But this is actually the best picture I've ever seen of human resilience, because it not only demonstrates it right in front of you, it tells you from where it comes. It comes from the adults that surround the child. And I'm not very good at math, but I can count 3 adults. One of them might be the dad, one might be the mom or the grandma. But what I know is that when the adults that are the family are able to support the child, the rest of us are additive. And I know that when, for whatever reason, families are not able to come through, then the rest of us become absolutely critical. My mission is to prepare adults to be the kind of people young people deserve in their lives. All youth. Breathe, because this is not an easy talk. Once upon a time, there was a town built beyond the bend of a beautiful river, and children were playing besides the river when they noticed 3 bodies in the water. They ran for help, and the townsfolk quickly pulled the bodies out. One was dead, so they buried her. One was ill, so they took her to the hospital and nursed him to health. The third was healthy, so they placed her with a family who cared for her and took her to school. Every day, bodies came floating down the river, and every day people tended to them, taking the sick to the hospitals, placing the healthy with families, and burying the dead. This went on for years, and the townsfolk came to expect the bodies, and they developed systems for recovering and attending to them. They were generous, and a few gave up their jobs to do it full time. They developed pride in their generosity and their efficiency in body tending. But during all these years, and despite the effort, nobody thought to go upriver beyond the bend that hid what was above them and find out, or maybe even ask, why the bodies came floating down the river. Folks, we live in an inflection point in human history. We have always known that bad things ran in families. We have always understood that if something bad happened to a grandmother, it was more likely to happen to the grandchild. And then what we did is we came up with the only explanation we could come up with, which is we blame the communities and we blame the families. And that is the root of human othering. That is the root of what destroys us as people and as societies, is we blame the victims rather than elevate them and give them the resources that they need. Because what we know now is that we know, based on science merely of the last 20 to 24 years, we know that it's about child protection. And that when we give young people the resources they need to develop to their potential, they thrive. And the problem is that under certain conditions of oppression and low resources, the adults are working on survival issues and cannot protect the children to the extent that they need. We can do better. We know what is needed. What we know is the childhood trauma may, it's not an absolute, but may affect the body, the brain, behavior, and even genetics, what you pass along to the next generation. But what we need right now is a course correction. The trauma-sensitive movement has been very active for about the last 10 or 12 years, depending on what the field is. And I do go out in the field a lot and work in a lot of agencies. And what I will tell you is that when trauma sensitivity comes into an agency, the agency often clashes within itself. Because trauma sensitivity makes you deeply empathetic, which you should be. But the people who are rooted in positive youth development say, I get that you're empathetic, but giving kids 4, 7, 8 chances, you become one more chain in the link of oppression. You must not lower your standards on our youth, or you hurt them. So what we need is an integration of all we know that works with youth. We have to integrate the positive youth development model, because then you would lower your expectation on nobody. Resilience building strategies so that we can help young people to thrive even through difficult times. Trauma sensitive practices, because people do deserve healing and empathy. We need a model that acknowledges pain, but that sees the best in people. A model that acknowledges structural racism and the undermining forces of low expectations generally, but that prevents a new label from being slapped onto already marginalized communities. In contrast, rather than calling communities traumatized, we have to recognize the inherent strengths of individuals, communities, and cultures that have thrived despite the undermining forces that surround them. So therefore, we need an equity and anti-racist lens to be fully integrated, lest actually the aspirational models do harm. Why? Because at the root of positive youth development, at the root of resilience, is the power of human relationships to help people thrive. And I have devoted my entire life to elevating these forces, and I believe them with my heart and my soul. But if you tell people that all you need is a good family that surrounds you, then what happens to those young people who do have the good family, who do have the high expectations, but then have to confront the undermining forces in their lives? Who are they left to blame? Themselves. And then when racism's biggest issue is when it creates self-hatred or low expectations of yourself, you have done more harm than good by this aspirational model. Instead, we have to prepare people with an anti-racist lens so they understand how to navigate undermining forces and to shift the blame away from themselves and have the critical consciousness to be able to confront those forces that challenge them. At the root of all models is the primacy and the power of human relationships to build strong, successful youth and to heal those who've endured hardships. This is the sweet spot. This is the essence of Reaching Teens, the Reaching Teens Toolkit. What do we know? And in this model, you should hear all the models I've discussed without any jargon, because if it's got jargon in it, it's not ready for translation. This is all models. We know that young people need safe, secure, and sustained relationships to thrive. We even know that such relationships can allow them to heal from hard past. We have to guide them to be accountable to being their best selves. And when we do so, they have to know that our high expectations are rooted in our caring. And ideally, our efforts at accountability must enhance rather than disrupt our very protective relationships. So what can we do, especially for young people who've had the hardest lives? How do we make the greatest progress? To understand this, we have to understand brain development, and we have to understand neural pathways. Neural pathways are bundles of nerves that skip thinking, skip processing, because you've just had an experience so many times that you can react to it quickly. You'll be vigilant for the same experience and react very quickly. That is how the brain is designed. So when you're a baby and you get born and you go, and your mother understands that that's a plea for nurturance or for nourishment, and she takes out a breast or gives you a bottle, and that happens over and over again, then what you learn is that when I have a need, all I have to do is ask and I will receive. And you will see the world as secure and predictable. But if your mother doesn't have the ability to understand what that, or the resources to give you what you need, then what do you do next? You cry. And when that happens over and over again, you have neural pathways laid down that say, when I have a need, I have to become highly emotional to get my need met. And what if you don't get your needs met even at that point? What do you do next? You scream. And when that happens over and over again, your neural pathways say that the only way your needs will be met is if you are highly reactive. What if your needs are still not met? What do you do next? You give up because you're not going to get fed. So you begin self-stimulating and withdrawing. And when that happens over and over again, what happens is you learn, I actually do not have control over my environment. So these neural pathways are laid down very early in childhood. And we all know young people who are adolescents who are either very secure, highly emotional, deeply reactive, or completely withdraw within themselves. Here's the amazing thing, folks. The amazing thing is that adolescence is a time of astounding brain reshaping. We can change people for the last time in adolescence. When we do what? we have a repeated exposure to a new environment or new experiences. So what do? We give kids the opposite of what they've learned to receive. For a kid who is needed to be highly reactive in order to make himself feel safe, we double down on safety. And we give so much safety that brain learns it doesn't have to react, it just receives. For the kid who is highly emotional, but has learned that his emotions will not be heard, we hear them loudly and clearly, and we elevate and we celebrate those emotions, and we do it over and over again. And the human being learns that it's good and safe to feel. This is how we change lives. But again, it's in a safe, repeated experience. And who will you meet when you do this? You will meet the most compassionate beings on earth. I have worked with youth enduring homelessness for over 40 years. The young people I work with are the most compassionate and loving beings on earth when they feel safe. So I could explain this on a spiritual level, but on a brain level, I can also explain it. Because these kids' brains, they have protectors' brains. They have learned how to be vigilant, how to be reactive in order to protect themselves. But when we double down on their safety and we enable them to feel safe, then what happens is their brains remain brilliant. Their protectors' brains that have been designed in order to be protective remains brilliant, but can remain quiet because they themselves are safe. And yet, they also, this part of protective part of their brain remains brilliant, and they have protection to spare. And what is protection to spare? It's compassion, it's empathy, it's human love. And so lower my expectations on the kids who have hardest lives? Hell no. I will double down on creating a safe environment for them and elevate their potential to the fullest, because they bring a lot to the world. Let's talk about youth development. We're going to talk about these models very quickly. So let's talk about youth development first. First off, how are we defining success for all young people? It's not about grades. It's not about their happiness in the moment. We have to begin looking at the 35-year-olds that we are developing. And when we look at the 35-year-olds that we are developing, we understand we care about compassion and tenacity, collaborative spirits, and creativity. And we look at kids differently when we understand the adults we hope to develop. Next, we do not have as a goal to have kids be problem-free. I'm an adolescent doctor. When I began my training, the goal was to, talk to kids about STIs and other stuff. Don't get chlamydia. That's what we said all the time. Well, that is not an inspirational message. The absence of chlamydia is not inspirational. It's not something to strive for. The sentence that changed my life was when Karen Pittman, I heard her say, she's one of the mothers of the youth development movement, problem-free is not fully prepared. Our goal, hands down, is to get kids fully prepared to lead us into the future. Oh, and by the way, chlamydia can get in the way, right? We inspire with who they can be rather than dwell on what they shouldn't do. Remember, when we're talking about adolescence as well, there's 3 fundamental questions that adolescents are thinking all the time. The big one is, who am I? That's what defines successful development. Who am I? If you can answer that question, as a person who contributes to the community, as a person who has meaning and purpose, you're going to rock. The corollary questions are, am I normal and do I fit in? We matter. So Boys and Girls Clubs, we have pools in some of our sites, we have basketball courts in all of them. But let me tell you something, and kids come into the building, they've never yet, no kid's ever knocked on the door and gone, may I come in and have a meaningful relationship with a human being, please? It's not why they come. They come for the pools. But let me tell you something, folks, a pool has never changed a life, not once. It's the swim coach, it's the lifeguard that says, you're not going under on my watch. That's what changes lives, right? So it's about the people more than the buildings or the programs. Young people need to feel valued. We have to see them as the experts in their own lives. That doesn't mean they know more than us. We have the wisdom. of years, but they understand their environment. And if we don't include them to be thinking about how our ideas are going to play in their own environment, then we're not giving them the opportunity to grow. Adults can be instructive and supportive, but children have to choose to carry out activities as independently as possible. And there's nothing that discourages mastery more than an adult who says, here, let me do that for you. Might seem kind, but what's the message? I don't think you're capable of doing it yourself. That's the message. And children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they've never failed to imitate them. This is why quiet down, kids, has literally never worked. Now let's talk about being pro-development. Being pro-development has to be a very active step. I call your attention to this report that came out about, I'd say about a year and a half ago, called The Promise of Adolescence. Really worth reading. Now, here is something that I'm trying to help people to understand, even though it's not in the textbooks yet, right? What is the fundamental question adults have about adolescence? It's, do I still matter? You know you matter when you have to teach your kid how to write, how to spell, how to count, when you have to protect them from going in the streets. But during adolescence, adults wonder if they matter. If we're going to help parents understand how much they do matter, we have to begin flipping the script. We have to shift the way adolescence is seen. If you look at most books on adolescence, if you look at the way most people speak about adolescence, they frame it as a time to be survived instead of a developmental opportunity to be optimized and celebrated. And as long as we think like that, we are never going to make a difference in the lives of adolescents. Here's how we see adolescence. Right? So if you have a 10-year-old and she's sitting, you're in the grocery store line, she puts your head on the shoulder, you can almost count on the mother of the 15-year-old behind you going, hang on and get those hugs while you can. She's going to become a monster you won't recognize and might not even like. This is the way we see adolescence. That messaging is poisonous to the mother preparing for adolescence and to the child entering adolescence. There are myths about adolescence. I can disprove each one of these, and in my next book I do, right? These myths that adolescents think they're invincible, that they're wired for risk. Well, if you believe those myths, then the only thing you're going to do is protect them from themselves instead of develop them to navigate their own environment. If you believe that they don't care what parents think, that they don't like adults, then you're not going to engage. If you think they can't be reasoned with, you're not going to talk to them. If you think they're self-centered, you're going to miss out on the greatest thing adolescents bring to the world, which is their idealism, right? We have to really speak the truths about adolescence, because if we don't, kids will live down to those low expectations we are setting for them. And when an adult says, do I matter? If they do not answer that question with a resounding yes, we will not serve as the guides adolescents need into a safe adulthood. So we need to refute these myths and speak the truths. One of the great things that we have to correct is the way the adolescent brain has been portrayed. The adolescent brain has been portrayed in a way that is deeply damaging. I'm going to give you a different way of thinking about the brain in a way that will prepare you to communicate with kids and that is accurate. To understand this, you have to understand that when you're talking about gray matter, you're talking about the actual nerves. When you're talking about the white matter, you're talking about those bundles and connections, the neural pathways between the nerves, the things I described earlier. Development is about laying down the white matter. It is about creating more efficiency by having neural pathways that allow the brain to think more quickly. That's what development is. So you begin as a child and all your nerves, your gray matter, it's all connected, but by little gravelly roads, bumpy, inefficient. You can get there, but not easily. Development is about building super highways. Where do the super highways get built? Between the towns. Where the towns are is, for better or worse, where you have experiences. So you can have a neural pathway laid down in the town of trauma. but you can also have it laid down in the town of I trust in human connection and I embrace education. Where the towns get laid down, for better or worse, is based on your experience. Superhighways get built between the towns. Reward centers in your brain encourage the towns to get built in certain places. So we are naturally wired during adolescence to go when you're with peers, because you're supposed to hang out with peers. That's how ultimately I'm going to get grandchildren, right? So we want to be with peers. We have the reward centers go off in specially designed places. So that's going to encourage those towns. But experiences, for better or worse, also lay down the towns. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that allows us to think, to reason, to plan. The amygdala is the part of the brain that's really about our emotions. Pruning is a matter of shaping neural pathways to increase efficiency. In other words, if you have a superhighway, you don't want the car to turn off onto a gravelly road and get lost. You're going to put up the signs that block those gravelly roads. That's what pruning is getting rid of inefficient connections. Neuroplasticity is the fact that adolescence gives us a chance to reshape the brain. For better or worse, our job is to make sure that the answer is better. It's a time of astoundingly rapid brain growth. So what do we know? And you've heard everyone say, the emotional centers do develop first. And golly, that makes sense, right? Because you have to learn who to trust and who not to trust before you can do an algebra problem, right? This is about survival. So we do need our emotional centers to develop first. But remember, development is a process, not an event, right? So it's not like you suddenly at the age of 25, when your brain's done developing, get rational. You're also developing rationally. And every day is better than the day that precedes it. Reasoning ability always exists, but it's solidifying. But the emotional centers are particularly brilliant. What's the way you don't want to see it? This was an Allstate ad that deeply offends me. Why do most 16-year-olds drive like they're missing a part of their brain? Because they are. How dare you talk about teenagers that way and not understand how that's going to undermine their development and the way adults interact with them? The right way to see it is that there's a critically important opportunity to shape the future by working with the adolescent brain. Our job is to enrich and protect it, to create enriching experiences and to protect our kids. Here's the language I want you to use. Adolescents are super learners. There will never be another time in human development where you will learn as much. Experimentation is a necessity. It's our job to create enriching, exciting, safe opportunities for our natural explorers to grow. Don't say risk takers, say natural explorers. But it's also our job to protect from harm. This is the puzzle of adolescence. It's the who am I puzzle. So why is it that our super learners push the edges? And what do? They push to the edges because that's where new knowledge is. Their reward centers say, gain knowledge, get excited with things new, push to the edges. The adult's job is to do two things: create clear boundaries beyond which our kids cannot stray, and golden opportunities at the edges so that kids will optimize their learning there. So the adolescent brain continues to seek new knowledge and to expand. Adolescents are not inherently risky. They are inherently explorers. Risk is when adults do not do our job by creating appropriate boundaries and golden opportunities. It's on us, not them. The last major point I want to make about the brain is about communication. So here's the thing. The adolescent emotional brain is brilliant. That's a fact, all right? And what the issue is which part of the brain are we going to turn on? The rational part of the brain or the emotional part of the brain? And it's about how we communicate. When we communicate with what's called hot communication, which is angry or condescending or belittling, we are turning on the emotional part of the brain. And when the emotional part of the brain is going, the rational part of the brain can't think because the adolescent emotional part of the brain is so dominant. But when we use what's called cold communication, which is anything but cold, in fact, it's deeply warm and loving. When we use cold communication, then we allow the adolescent brain, the amygdala, the emotional part, to remain calm. And hear me clearly, the rational part of the adolescent brain, when the emotional part is left calm, is every bit as wise as a 40-year-old's. It is again on us knowing how to communicate. Resilience, next model. It's about overcoming adversity, being able to bounce back. But it's not just about survival, right? It's also about being able to thrive. If you have the ability to be able to thrive or survive in the most difficult times, you will thrive in the best of times as well. Partly, it's a mindset. Here's what you need to understand. We all come from either the jungle or the woods or the tundra, depending on where our ancestors came from. And we were designed to be able to escape the lion, the tiger, or the bear. We're prey. And if you don't believe me, think about what happens to you when you're stressed. The first thing you feel is butterflies in your belly. Why is that? Because if I see a tiger, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to run. Where do I need the blood? I need the blood in my butt, which is my jumping muscle, and my legs, which are my running muscles. So butterflies is literally the blood leaving your belly to go to your butt so you can jump. How cool is that, right? And so many other things happen when you are stressed out. But what's important to remember is you can't think. Why is that? Because you're not supposed to turn to the tiger and say, hey, I'd like to work it out. And you also don't connect best when you're most stressed. Why is that? Because you're not supposed to turn to the tiger and say, help me understand why you want to eat me, right? So resilience begins with understanding what is a real tiger versus just feels like a tiger. If we can transform our bodies and our minds to understand when we're in danger and when we're not, now we can think and now we can feel. But the scariest thing in humanity is not the tiger, folks. It's the tiger lurking in the grass. This is one of the coolest pictures you're ever going to see. Allow your eyes to focus on the middle because there's a tiger right there. Where's the tiger? Could be there, could be there, could be anywhere. It's that sense of hypervigilance, of never knowing where it is, that actually plays the biggest toll with trauma, right? These are different hormones, folks. This is adrenaline, short bursts of energy, right? In the context of race and racism, this is racial hatred. It is, because this is Ku Klux Klan, Nazis. This is racial hatred that's terrifying. It's adrenaline driven, and it is not the primary driver of the biologic consequences of trauma. This is, I need to be able to run or jump at any time. I have to be hyper vigilant, never knowing when I'm safe. This is cortisol that keeps your blood pressure high at all times and allows you to jump. This is what drives the consequences of trauma. In the context of racism, this is implicit biases and structural forces. These are the things you don't see, but that are ever present, and you never know when they're going to affect you. I could make a very strong case for that reason, that biologically, these structural forces that you don't see explicitly are more dangerous to your biology and to your psychology. The bottom line of resilience is that young people will be more resilient when the important adults in their lives believe in them without condition and hold them to high expectations. right? The important adults in their lives ideally are their parents, but the rest of us are always additive. Believing unconditionally, that's not, it's okay to do drugs, darling. That's, I'm not going anywhere when you do. And high expectations is not about grades or trophies. It's about knowing who you are. The most protective force in a young life is for someone to know who they really are and what they're authentically capable of becoming. Resilience is not invulnerability. I've written textbooks on this. I could move into your house. I could not make you invulnerable. I didn't raise my own kids to be invulnerable. It's not possible. But what we can do is help people understand that those things, those sensitivities that often make them hurt the worst, are often the things that predict their best life. I'm a 60-year-old man who's had the best life of anyone you know, and who, when I was 17, was deeply suicidal for a year, never attempted anything, but hated myself deeply. And what I hated was all the best parts of me. My sensitivity, the fact that I was seeing things other people couldn't see. It didn't feel masculine. It didn't feel what I just wanted to stop thinking. Our job is not to make kids invulnerable. Our job is to make kids understand how to recognize their strengths, even if society isn't calling them strengths, and to leverage and build upon those strengths. Resilience can be exhausting, right? We have to acknowledge that being resilient all the time because you're always combating tigers in the grass, it's not something that we should just applaud. It's not our goal is to have kids be resilient. Our goal is to have kids not have to be resilient. Our goal is to give them all the opportunities to develop so that they can have more joy. Resilience is not as simple as it seems when it's explained in the aspirational tone. In fact, as I said in the beginning, the aspirational model itself can do harm, because what it can do is produce internalized shame, internalized racism, if you don't understand that there are external forces that need to be navigated. So yes, young people do live up or down to the expectations we set for them, but undermining forces like structural racism are barriers to thriving, even for otherwise resilient youth with supportive adults in their lives. And here is a slide that we have to be screaming from the rooftops, which is, when does resilience reach its limits? Let's call that depression. When depression looks like adults who are depressed, we see those kids, when they're like, not sleeping, not eating, losing too much weight, not bathing, we catch those kids. When they're sad, we catch those kids. What everybody needs to know is that half of adolescents who are depressed are not sad. They're irritable and angry. And then we call those kids bad instead of sad. And this is the school to prison pipeline, guys. We set them aside rather than learn how to protect them. Above all, the most powerful thing in human resilience is human connection. Because as a single human being, we blow in the wind like a stick and are fragile. Joined with one other human being, we become nearly immovable. Joined together as a wall, it is impossible to knock us down. And when we join together and one of us is struggling and we turn to another person for support, we can do so without shame or stigma, because we know it's only a matter of time before this person's struggling and you will lend your own support. There's nothing like relationships to build resilience. Now let's talk about trauma a bit. Trauma does not break us. The fact that we've been through difficult times does not mean you absolutely will have your body or your brain change. It means it's more likely. So what's important is that people learn that they are deserving of more focused attention to protect themselves. All right. This is the original study, which most of you are familiar with. This is Felitti and Anda, where they looked at 18,000 folks in San Diego County in California. And what they learned is that those people who had extra adverse childhood experiences were more likely to have their bodies change, their brains change, well, specifically their bodies and their behaviors. That's what this study was able to show, that you were more likely, depending on how many of these things, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, exposures, substance use, mental illness, being neglected, the higher your number was, the more likely you were to go to jail, to be depressed, to be divorced. I don't think that surprised anyone. But you're also more likely to have diabetes, to become obese, to have cancer, to have lupus. All of this stuff became clear. But what was missing is those were all the things that happened in your home. This study, which was done by a mentee of mine, Roy Wade in Philadelphia, added the other ACEs. And what it added is things like exposure to violence, being bullied, exposure to racism and poverty. And it discovered that all of these things were additive and all of these things led to more challenging outcomes. But so yes, childhood trauma may affect the body, the brain, behavior, and genetics. But let's be clear, that is not why I'm giving you this talk. It's not why I'm in this movement. It's this. Yeah, you are more likely to have bad things happen to you. But if you have your grandmother who's standing by your side, right, then you end up turning out much like other people who didn't have these bad things happen. Why? Because when my grandmother says to me, hey, Ken, if your dad's coming home drunk tonight, you're sleeping with me. When my grandmother is saying to me, Ken, you're not going out in the corner. Why? Because it's dangerous tonight. And you tell those boys that you have to stay home with me because I hurt my leg and you have to help me around the house. You tell them that. When my grandmother does that for me, then I am borrowing her hypervigilance. I'm borrowing her brain pathways. I'm borrowing her always looking out for danger, her readiness to jump. And when I borrow that from her, I do not need to mount my own hormonal pathways differently. I do not need to change my endocrine system. I do not need to change my brain. I borrow hers. And that is the power of love. That is the power of human connection to protect one another. But what else do we know? What do we know about the grandmas? We know that they die too soon because it is a burden to have to protect everybody else, which is why there should be no trauma-sensitive intervention that only works on one generation. It is why when I train professionals, which is most of what I do, I don't just train people or help people develop how to more effectively communicate with young people. I also teach them self-protection, loving boundaries. Why? Because if I'm asking you to become the grandma or the grandpa, I know that I'm hurting you. It's easier to avert your eyes. It's harder to see the truths. But if I'm going to get you prepared to see the truth, to elevate and protect kids, I need to have you have the opportunity and the knowledge on how to protect yourself as well. Because I can't be doing you the harm of just telling you watch out for the kids at your own expense. What do the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, do to your behavior? It makes you more likely to be hypervigilant. It makes you more likely to be highly reactive. It makes you more likely to lie. Why is that? Because if your daddy came home and says, hey, who took the last hot dog? And you say, I did, daddy, and he throws you against the wall, you stop saying you took the last hot dog. It makes you more likely to confabulate, to make up stories that may not be true. Why? Because if bad things were happening to your home, the way you escaped was by going into a different reality. And when we get close to kids, they sometimes are more likely to confabulate, to make up a different reality, because the reality that we're asking them to acknowledge is one that they've learned to ignore. So we have to understand what these behaviors or what trauma can do to behaviors, but more importantly, how do we react to behaviors? Because you know what? I care about truth. I care about calm. I care about human connection. And when you're less likely to trust me, golly, it's hard for me. When you're more likely to lie to me, it's hard for me. So what do? I would intrinsically become angry, right? So What do I need to do? I need to understand what's about me and what's not about me. So these are the key principles of trauma-sensitive practices. If you go to my hospital and you ask the nurses or social workers to describe what it's like to work with me, they'll tell you how things run more smoothly when I'm on the floor. They'll tell you what a calm person I am. Let me tell you the secret to my being calm. I'm faking. I'm not calm. There's no part of me that's intrinsically calm. But it's this principle that I'm working on. As daggers are flying at me, I understand they're not about me. They're about pain someone has suffered, that they've earned the right to not trust. And the fact that they don't trust me isn't about me. And if I think it's about me, then I'm going to become defensive, which is one slippery slope away from becoming offensive. So this is where it begins, knowing what's about you and what's not about you. From Sandy Bloom and the Sanctuary Movement, changing your lens from what's wrong with you to something happened to this person. That's what explains their behavior. Seeing people as they deserve to be seen, not based on labels they've received or behaviors they may have displayed. We're going to go into this deeply, and we're going to go in deeply into giving control back to people from whom control has been taken away. At its core, trauma is about losing the sanctity of your body or trusting that you can control your environment. And anything I do that is top down, that is an answer from me, is trauma insensitive. Anything I do to elevate your inherent strengths or to give you control in the interaction is inherently trauma sensitive. Trauma does not break kids, nor does it cause brain damage. I talked earlier about the phrase protector's brain and how I want you to begin using the phrase protector's brain for the kids who are highly reactive. And I want you to stop using the terms that I have demonstrated are racist and undermining. There is no such thing as a kid who is oppositional defiant or conduct disordered. Those are things that have happened to them. We cannot give those labels. If you believe that a person is oppositional or conduct disordered, you will protect society from them rather than develop them. But if you understand that they've experienced trauma, you will embrace them and you will heal them. So we've got to use the right language. We've got to begin talking about the protector's brain. I don't have the time right now to teach you the choreograph, but the biggest change I make in kids' lives, actually, I will tell you this because I think it's important. If I ask a kid to describe themselves, most of the kids, especially the ones who've been through systems, they'll say things like, well, you know, I have an anger problem. There's so much wrong with that statement, right? And I'll ask them, so let me ask you some questions. Do you see problems before other people do? Yeah. Do you have any good friends? Well, I think I have mostly acquaintances or mostly associates. The people you'd call good friends, I'd call them family. Yeah, you have any brothers or sisters? One of each. You watch out for them always. So if danger was coming at you or danger was coming at your little brother or your sister, would you do what it took to protect them? Absolutely, because what happened to me isn't going to happen to them. Well, you know what, man? You have a protector's brain, and that is your superpower. And if I was on a desert island, I'd rather be with you than anybody else, because you're going to see danger I may not see, and you're going to look out for us both. That is your power. That is your blessing. Your challenge in life is to learn how to tell the difference between when you're safe and when you're not. So you only bring out your superpowers when they're needed. Can we work together on helping you figure out when you're safe and when you're not? Do you see the difference between that and you have an anger problem, right? Spiritually, it's a huge difference. I'm going to skip this and this. The ditty that I'd like to end this section on trauma with is nobody dared go near the tower because a fearsome dragon sat on its top until one day a knight rode up. Do you need help to get down? Please be the knight. The kids might be pushing you away, but not because they want you to disappear. They're testing you. Let's talk about strength-based communication. Strength-based communication is not about praise for the sake of praise. It's about listening hard until genuine strengths are revealed. It's about having a kid know you're on their team. It's about highlighting and elevating their strengths. It's about facilitating and recognizing and celebrating those strengths, planting seeds so that a young person knows that they have those strengths. It's got to be real. None of this vapid praise about what the kid looks like or what sports teams you both like. It's a waste. Listen hard, because strength-based communication is essential to promoting positive behavioral changes. If you ask a kid what they want more than anything else, by the way, this next 1 minute, if you pay attention to the next 1 minute, I'll bet you'll save a life that you might not have been able to save or turn a life around. If you ask a kid what they want more than anything, what they'll tell you is that they want someone who has their back. What does that mean? Behavioral change is a process, not an event. It's a few steps forward and a few steps back, a few steps forward and a few steps back. And we love to praise kids, right? And so someone comes to me and they go, Dr. Ken, I got straight A's and I want to go, look at you. You're so smart. You want to be a lawyer. You're going to be able to do it. You're going to do good in college. I'm so proud of you. The next time that kid gets A's, I know it. Time after that, I know it. I get the call right after his mom. But when his dad dies or goes to prison, and now his mom is getting depressed, and he's now taking care of all of his siblings. He can't begin his own homework till 11. And he has to wake up till at 4 in the morning to be able to cook breakfast for all of his siblings and to get them ready for school. Now he's falling asleep in class. His teacher says, why are you even here if you're not going to pay attention? Now he's getting a D and in danger of failing. Will I know? No. Because I said, I'm so proud of you for getting A's. I have his front. I don't have his back. We have to change the essence of our communication with our kids so that what we are doing is celebrating presence and connection. And instead, we say to the kid who says, I'm getting straight A's, you go, thanks for always including me in your life. Thanks for telling me what's going on. Learn to say that. You're going to know when the young person is experiencing good things, and more importantly, you're going to know when they're not. When we're talking about behavioral change, a lot of folks talk about pre-contemplation, that, gosh, a kid hasn't even started yet thinking about change. So what do we do if they haven't started thinking about change? What do? We throw some information at them, right? Throw them some facts, but that doesn't change a life. Really, pre-contemplation is about the fact that the kid lacks confidence and they might be demoralized. Through strength-based communication, we're going to build their confidence and help them understand all that is good and right in them. So if this is a field of a young person's life or young people's lives, and this kid is smoking marijuana, devastating to brain development at that age. This kid is selling drugs, devastating to the community. This kid wants to become pregnant, and gosh, she's only 14. That's going to create intergenerational poverty. So what do? We throw some information at these kids, and we say to this kid, young man, do you not understand that marijuana will fry your brain and make you grow breasts and shrink you down there? Incidentally, all of which is true-ish. And how does he respond? Thanks, doc. And he smokes some more. Why? Because you forgot to ask why he was smoking. And if you had asked, you would have discovered that it was to help him chill, because he's really stressed out. And he's really stressed out because of the depth of his sensitivity. And now you're telling him where he's going to grow and where he's going to shrink. Didn't help his sensitivity. Didn't help his stress. So he's going to turn instead to the thing that he can do easily, which is to smoke to deal with his pain. What are we going to do instead? We're going to listen hard to behaviorally operational strengths. In other words, because the kid possesses this strength, they have the seeds of success within them. You're listening for compassion, insight, resilience, the desire to change their community or build a better world for their own children. You're listening for all that is good and right, so that what we can do is recognize and build that. So those of us who are strength-based communicators, we don't not talk about marijuana, but we talk about marijuana in the context of their sensitivity, in the context of all that is good and right and their superpower, and why not to shut down the best thing about them, which is their ability to think and their motivation. Love. Love is seeing someone as they deserve to be seen, as they really are, not through the lens of the behaviors they've sometimes needed to display. Loving is not the same as liking. You don't have to like the kids. Liking is something subjective that is based on your own biases, your own experiences, who you think's fun. Loving is listening until a kid's strengths come out, and then elevating and celebrating those. It's funny that we were both quoting Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou said, "I've learned that people forget what you said, forget what you did, but never forget how you made them feel." So what does counseling look like? You talk about why you love, what you felt in your heart when you knew you were on the kid's side. You then talk about why you're worried, why your stomach just twists when you think about what might be getting in their way. You come up with a plan with a young person, recognizing them as the expert in their own life, and you accompany them to the next step in their journey. So we don't have to all be counselors. I can teach a neighborhood watch person to do this in 10 minutes. So we look at that young man who's smoking marijuana and we say, the best thing about you is how much you care and how much you feel. That is your superpower. That predicts you're going to be the best father and lover and boss and colleague and friend. Pause, deep breath. But I'm feeling worried too. I'm feeling worried because the thing you have going for you the most is your motivation, your drive to be better. But you're smoking 24/7. And when you smoke 24/7, that's going to shut down your motivation. And that is, I would hate to see someone with your gift not achieve what you're capable of. I'm wondering if we can come up with a plan to manage all of the stress you're feeling, but in a way that doesn't shut you down. I'd like to get you to a person who can really support you to build your own skills to manage stress. Heart, I love. Belly, I worry. Head, I plan. Hands, I accompany you in your journey. Every person in a neighborhood can learn to talk to kids in this way. We talked about the importance of secure relationships, and that is profoundly important. But what does it mean? It either means knowing the person isn't going anywhere, which is why our best work in public health isn't teaching doctors what to say, it's teaching people in the neighborhood what to do, right? But also, when I'm talking to a young person, I need them to know that they're not reliant on me. The wisdom can't come out of me. I need to make them understand that they possess the strengths. They have the ruby slippers within themselves. The solution is there. It's what I've seen. It's what I've elevated. I can leave the room and they still have it. So we have to figure out how to give kids those ruby slippers. And when a kid says to you, nobody's ever seen me like this, you grasp who I am more than anyone is. You on the inside, you can celebrate, but you got to turn it back on the kid. No, man, you chose, hold up the mirror. You chose to show me who you are. And I am deeply grateful. But if you show other people, I think you will see that they also will be able to give you what you deserve. Now, in the last big section of today's talk, I want to talk about giving young people control over their decisions. This is literally what we do every time we offer choices rather than dictates. But it's also about getting kids' brains to be calm. We have to be radically calm, even amidst a chaotic reality, as the first step in helping youth access their thinking powers and compassionate natures. This is what co-regulation is. We're lending someone our calm so they can get there. We're communicating from our emotional centers, our amygdala, to theirs. This is the key to de-escalation, to bringing down the temperature. It's critical to anticipating when there's a problem. I had a kid one day who said to me, I said, tell me about who you are. And he said, I like to think of myself as like Mother Teresa, but with an anger problem, right? That's who our kids are. They are kids who are deeply compassionate, but they're only going to get there when they don't need to be so self-protective. And then when we co-regulate with kids, then they can learn to self-regulate. Now, if you have a little kid, you have a 5-year-old, this is who you want to look like as a co-regulator. You want to look like that duck just gliding on the water. Life is good. Life is stable. Life is secure. You're smooth. But if you look like this to an adolescent, you're not doing them any good because they can't imagine looking like this. We got to tell adolescents the truth. It's more like we're the ducks on the top of the water, staying on top only because our little feet are paddling like crazy. And we show them what we do to paddle, and we help them learn how to paddle themselves. We have to talk to kids also in a way that doesn't undermine their competence. That means that we have to help them think, none of that hot communication that we talked about. And we have to understand how adolescents think. Adolescents see things, especially when they're in crisis, in very concrete terms, not thinking far into the future, in very concrete terms. So why is it that the way that we normally talk to kids doesn't work? Because the way we normally talk to kids is we lecture them. Let me give you a lecture. Don't you know that what you're doing right now, which I'm going to call behavior A, could easily lead to consequence B, which is a slippery slope down to consequence C. I never thought you would do consequence C. Now I wonder what's between your ears besides cobwebs. If consequence C happens, you're more than likely to go on to consequence D, which you never would have done if you didn't begin hanging out with Paul, whose own mother doesn't love him. If consequence E happens, you're like, look at me, young man, when I'm talking to you. This is not for my own good. If consequence F happens, you go on to consequence G, H, I. And do you know what happens if consequence I happens? You die. And what does the kid hear? Blah, 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 wah, 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 die. Why? Because it was hot communication. It was condescending. And the mathematical structure was looking like this, like a complex algebra problem. You can't be running from a tiger and think like this. What we have to do is break big problems into small pieces, calmly let the kid figure it out themselves by giving them one step at a time so that they get it, got it. Mathematically, you're thinking about doing behavior A. I think I get that, but I have to tell you, I worry that that can lead to behavior B. What are you going to do to make sure B doesn't happen? And when they're at B, and only when they're at B, do we calmly ask them to consider C. It's a school-based clinic. It's a 14-year-old girl who got in a fight the day before with another girl, and who, when I asked her what was going to happen, was the fight over? She said, I'm going to kill her. This is why I brought a knife to school. I could have given her the whole lecture. Don't you understand that your life is flying before your eyes? You might end up trying to kill her and end up in jail in your whole life, or she might end up killing you first because she's got a gun or she's got a knife, or she could stab you in the back and you could be in a wheelchair in your entire life. What does she hear? Womp, 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 die. And what do? I activate her. And when I activate her, I make her highly emotional, meaning she can't think. And quite frankly, I'm not safe. She's got a knife in her pocket. If she's highly emotional in my presence, not good. So now I'm going to break this down. I'm going to draw on a piece of paper, one step at a time, and help her think this through. Keep your knife in your pocket, but I want you to take this pen out and I want you to stab me with it as if you were going to stab her. And she goes to stab me. and I take it out of her hand and I stab her in the back. I'm drawing all of this in the decision tree out. You're stabbed in the back and you end up in a wheelchair. Had you considered that you would be in a wheelchair after today? No, but could it happen? It won't. Do you know anyone it's happened to? Yeah, there's this guy in my block who's in a wheelchair, but things got out of hand for him. But they won't for you? No. So here's another option. You fight, but she uses her knife first. She stabs you in the heart and you end up dead. Had you considered the possibility that you could end up today dying? No. But could it happen? It won't. What do you want to have happen? I want her dead. Okay, she's dead. How do you feel? I feel happy. How long do you feel happy for? Think like a 14-year-old for a minute. She didn't say forever. She said all day. I said, what happens the next day? And she said, I get probation. I explained that she wasn't going to get probation, that she was going to go to jail. I asked her how her mom felt. She realized that her mom was ashamed. I asked her whether she was going to have kids in jail. She realized she wasn't going to have kids. Are you going to be able to finish your education? She wasn't going to be able to finish her education. When you get out of jail, is it going to be easy to get a job? And she took it all the way out to dying poor with no family. Is that realistic if you commit premeditated murder at 14? This is what your life looks like. Suppose you don't kill her. Suppose you don't fight. How do you feel? Angry. How long do you feel angry for? All day. And we let her finish school, have kids, and make her mom proud. 2 lives saved, 15 minutes. Is that brilliant? I'm hoping that behind the scenes you're going, yes, Dr. Ken, that's brilliant. So that I can make the point, there's no brilliance to this whatsoever. Folks, don't you see this as a lecture? All of you know all of these points. It's the delivery. The delivery is different. It empowered the young person because it broke a very abstract concept into simple steps. The last point I want to briefly cover, so we have time for questions, is stress management, right? Because this is also about giving people control, because learning to cope in a positive way is the way you thrive. Stress is incredibly uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable, it makes you sweat or smell or not think clearly. Coping is about dealing with the discomfort. There are different ways of coping. There are negative coping strategies and positive coping strategies. A big mistake is to believe that the negative coping strategies don't work. They work better, folks. This is drugs, this is cutting, this is punching someone in the face, this is sex out of the context of a relationship. It works great. The reason it's negative is because it destroys us. Our challenge is to raise kids with a wide repertoire of positive coping strategies so that the path of least resistance is right there. So when life gets hard, you'll have other things to do, things that are life affirming and that strengthen your family. We begin by changing the way we see the problem. If you're seeing a problem as a tiger or threatening your life and it's not, you're never going to bring your best self to the situation. So we think differently about it. We define the stressor differently. We understand what is a real versus a paper tiger. We learn to see problems as temporary. We learn to see that when we have good things in our lives, we can continue to take that action. They're not random. And we're not dependent on the program. We have the ruby slippers within ourselves. We can walk away from the program and continue to succeed. So we need a comprehensive stress management plan that helps people know how to deal with problems, breaking some problems into small pieces and learning to avoid other ones altogether. If we don't teach kids how to avoid problems, they're going to find drugs, because that's a way to avoid problems too, right? We have to deal with emotions in a way that elevates them sometimes and allows you to tuck them away sometimes. We have to integrate the body and the mind by learning how to sleep well, how to relax, how to use the power of exercise, how to use deep breathing to calm ourselves. And we need to leave kids with a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. Because if people can't answer the fundamental question, who am I? As I am a being who matters to other people, they will never be their best selves. So because I want to leave time for questions, I'm not going to take you to this site, but I want you, this is a free site you can all go to. This is a comprehensive multicultural parenting site that's run by the Center for Parent and Teen Communication, which I lead. On this, you will see an interactive stress reduction plan in the section for teens. You will also see parts that teach adults how to help teens learn to cope, and so much more. So please go to parentandteen.com, and I'm going to ask the center to make sure everybody has this link. Okay, almost done. How are we going to judge our success? Go ahead. Measure the things you care about measuring to keep your reporters happy: grades, jobs, graduation, suspension rates. But just understand that that's not the stuff that really matters as much. Understand that what we're really trying to do is prove that adolescents are capable of healing from trauma, helping our young people experience that people are worthy of trust, and quoting Kevin Ryan, the executive director of Covenant House. Why do we love? So that young people know that they're worthy of being loved. We want young people to never stop feeling. We want to create the kind of environment where staff never forgets how to feel. And we want to create schools and communities that are really safer by building our youth rather than separating those youth who have had the hardest lives from the rest of us. By launching all people into adulthood, knowing they're okay just the way they are. At the end of this talk, I know that listening to me is like drinking water from a fire hose. I do 5-day training spoke. I have a textbook that's 1,500 pages with 400 films on how to do this stuff. And I just in 90 minutes just gave you so much. And now you already have so many things on your plate and you're like, oh my gosh, how can this little man add more to my plate? Now he's telling me I have to love the children. And what I'm telling you from the bottom of my heart is that I haven't added anything to your plate. All that we're talking about is the plate. There is no program, no strategy that works that is not rooted in the power of human connection, love, and relationships. We've been talking about the plate. With that said, I'm going to pass this over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Ken. As I've been monitoring the chat throughout this presentation, I think many of you had the same experience I had many years ago when I first saw Ken talk. I saw so many yeses. I saw so many affirmations of the words that they heard. So I do want to, I'm actually going to take the facilitator's prerogative and ask a question. But for those in the audience, please send in any questions, specific questions you have for Ken at this time. There's so much there. Ken, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is when you talked about earlier, that analogy of the tiger, and part of the structural and systemic racism that is not seen. How do you get to that? I think that's one of those factors that can result in some of those, that internalized racism and oppression that you talked about. How do you help young people see that unseen?
Yeah, I think that's what critical consciousness is about. It's about learning to resist external forces. And I think understanding the word resistance is really key here. Resistance is not going against anybody else. It's not about protesting or anything. Resistance is about understanding the forces that come at you and learning to deflect them because you understand that they're undermining. And humbly, Jim, while I would love to talk about this extensively, I would love you to share with everyone the Reaching Teens chapter on communicating with young people about racism. It is, while I'm the editor of the entire work, it's written entirely by people of color who are some of the leading thinkers in the country and actually offers dialogue on how to address these issues. So please share that with everybody.
Yeah. The Reaching Teens material, although we're not in a place to sort of promote, I have to tell you that the Reaching Teens material is very helpful. And I had a chance to look at the chapter on addressing racism and discrimination with young people, and addressing issues of intersectionality, and all of it. It's very, very well done. As I see, again, any specific questions that are coming up, as I said, I didn't see a lot of questions coming up during the presentation because there was only sort of shout outs, yeses, so I'm looking at one right now. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. So any specific questions that you have for, and again, if we don't get specific questions, I'll be happy to continue with my, again, facilitator's prerogative and ask them myself. So I'm sorry, just to be clear, a couple of things. People are asking about the slides, the presentation. So the slides, a PDF of the slides will be up on our site within the next couple of days, as well as the video of the presentation. So you will all be able to go back and rewind and listen to Ken's words. Ken, I think this issue, the other thing is, I want you to say, if you could talk a little bit more about trauma. One thing that I often see coming up, even with many clinicians, when you talk about trauma, I think a big piece of this work is bringing that out into the light, from my perspective, right? Some clinicians have the approach, or some folks actually have the approach is, I'm not going to touch that. I'm not going to bring it up until my client, the person I'm working with, the young person, brings it up. What are your thoughts about that, about bringing trauma out? Because oftentimes it can be hidden for so many reasons. I wanted to get your thoughts about that. And I also say that because one of the things that I noticed in my work, and I work with young people as well as older folks and some young adults. And, one of the things that I do see is that, for adults who've been impacted by trauma, that issue that you raised earlier about identity, who am I, they're still carrying. And I always think, like, if this trauma, and it's all often tied into histories of trauma, that trauma had been opened up, that sort of box had been opened up earlier and processed and addressed, that's a big piece of it. Your thoughts on that, about bringing out the trauma and adversity? And
so I think that this is actually a 2-hour discussion, but let me respond briefly. To me, there's a couple of things I said in this talk that are kind of easy takeaways. One of the easy takeaways is about having kids' backs by celebrating relationship instead of by the knowledge of what they're saying. And another takeaway is the protector's brain, shifting the way people see themselves. So I have to tell you that I do not ask kids to reveal themselves to me on a first visit. What I do is, my goal is to forge a relationship and safety. And I will create certain terms that imply I'm open to trauma and I understand things will happen. So when a kid tells me they have anger, I'll just say something like, I'll bet you've earned it, huh, man? Right? So what I need to know is that I'm sending the young person back to a safe environment, meaning I need to know that they're not abused, that they're not in a home that's abused, where they're being actively abused, things like that. But otherwise, I let the information usually unfold over time and foster the relationship and the trust, as opposed to, I am not someone who believes in getting trauma scores the first time that I meet somebody. I do believe in practicing with a universally trauma-sensitive approach. You've probably noticed I'm using the word trauma-sensitive instead of trauma-informed. That is very carefully thought out. I care a lot about language, as I think you're probably guessing. So to be honest with you, I don't care what you know. I care about how you practice. Right? I care about what you do. And to me, the word sensitive implies practice more than just being informed. It's why I choose to use that word. So I practice in a universally trauma-sensitive manner, but I don't need you to tell me what it is that happened to you when I'm just meeting you. I hope that either I or the relationship I get you into. Remember also that I'm not a psychologist, I'm a doctor. Right? So I want to be loving and caring and get you to a safe relationship where over time in a safe setting, your truth can unfold. Whereas getting it all out right at once might make that person not feel safe with me.
Right. Yeah. No, and agreed, and agreed. And I think that is a very strong and consistent approach, right? Consistent with sort of how I view it is I'm listening for it and I'm developing relationship and creating a holding space where if and when it comes out, it is we can address it, process it, and talk about it openly as well. And as well as having those conversations with about trauma coupled with those conversations about resilience and sort of what they've done that's helped them. So I think we're on the same page with that. The other thing that I wanted to sort of a couple of, again, specific questions have come in around parenting. So you talked about parenting teens, and Kiara, if we can get that that website link into the chat so folks can access that, that would be great. So a couple of folks are talking about, do you have advice on how to encourage parents to use strength-based communication when they have a youth struggling with behaviors, yet have their own trauma that has played a part in their lives? Again, my guess is this could also be a 2-hour presentation in itself, but yeah.
Yeah, I could talk about parenting for days, and I've produced a lot of materials. And this is the site that we were talking about. Yeah. This site is actually only a small portion of what we do. We're trying to change the whole narrative around adolescence. But I think that you would have your question be pretty deeply answered on this site. So self-care is a strategic act of good parenting, right? And what we know, so the specific question, if I heard it correctly, was given that you might have had a hard life yourself, how do you parent in a way that you break the cycle of intergenerational trauma? Did I interpret that correctly, Jim? So self-care really, really is important. And, you know, one of the other great myths about adolescents is that they don't really care what's happening to their parents. And that has been refuted in study after study. Kids care most about you. And in fact, what you want is for your child to open up with you about the truths of their lives so you can effectively parent. And if you have had trauma yourself, as most of us have to some degree, if you've had trauma yourself, your child probably knows it. And if your child knows it, there's a very good chance your child is trying to spare you, to protect you. And the way in which they spare you is to protect you from the details of their lives. And when they protect you from the details of their lives, then what happens is you're actually not positioned to be the most effective parent. And the tragedy in all of this is precisely because you've had a hard life, there's a very good chance that you are really committed to making your child's life better than the one that you had. So the conversation that we need, so first step, take care of yourself. And when I say take care of yourself, please know that I'm not one of those guys who's saying yoga class at 5. Like, I'm not saying it's simple. I mean a deep dive into taking care of yourself, because when you do, your kid will breathe. Your kid will be relaxed because they care about you more than you can imagine. Then have a conversation. And the conversation sounds something like this. Darling, I love you so much. You know, I've been sick for the last couple of years. You know that your dad left me and that life has been really stressful. And I've noticed something about you. You're sparing me. You're trying to protect me. And gosh, I love that for you. I love you for that. I love having a child who cares enough about me to protect me. But you know what? As complicated as my life is, the one thing I know I can continue to do well is to be your parent. And the only way I can do that is if you include me in your life. I beg you to include me instead of sparing me. It's the greatest gift you could give me. That's the choreograph. Okay, you'll find that somewhere in this site, but that is the choreograph. That is my easiest answer to you. And the other thing is, you know, if you're struggling and you're working to stay afloat, to be that duck, share it. Share what you're doing. Share what's working. Share what isn't working. That's how your child grows. And that's how we break cycles of intergenerational trauma so that our children don't need to repeat our mistakes. Oh, I shouldn't have used the word mistakes. because that implies it's something you chose, and strike that word. Our children do not need to repeat our cycles of trauma. That would have been a better word. I apologize.
So we are at time. I know, Kiara, if you want to quickly mention what are some of the upcoming events that we have. But before we do that, so a couple of things, please, please, please. Fill out the survey afterwards. Let us know what other topics in this area we can offer. I want to also please, and I've seen it already in the chat, everyone is sharing their thanks and their appreciation to you, Ken. I want to do that as well. This was an amazing presentation. And as I said, a repeat of the last presentation I saw from you, not the information by any means, because there was so much new stuff in here that wasn't even in the previous presentation I saw from you. That was phenomenal. And again, I want to thank you on behalf of the CTAC and our audience today for this amazing presentation. And some of you saw some upcoming events, and I want to thank you all in the audience for being here, for sharing. I hope, and our hope is that Ken's words and his perspective on this has touched you and will move you in your work moving forward. And please take advantage of the materials that he's developed. They're wonderful materials. And so I could only sort of let you know that they can be extremely helpful in your practice and your work with not only teens, but their parents as well. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.